Hey guys, and welcome back to a new video. In this video, I will show you how you can integrate a Google sign-in in your Jetpack Compose project using the clean architectural guidelines. Sounds complex, but it's actually something very simple we will do here. So we will have a simple button to sign in, and when we click that, then our Google accounts on our device will show up, and we can then choose an account we use to log into this application. And if we then click on an account, you see I'm signing in, and then we get to the profile screen where you can fetch the information of that account, like the profile picture, the username, and more. And then there's also sign out button, so we get to the first screen again to sign in with a different account, for example this one. And we'll also make sure that we stay signed in, so if we relaunch this app very quickly, then you can see I will directly be navigated to the profile screen and not need to log in again. And before we get started with the video, a quick little reminder that there is an ongoing Easter sale active for all my premium courses. Till April 12th, you can get 30% discount on all of my paid courses. I really never had a bigger discount before. And to apply it, you can simply use the coupon code Easter30 during checkout. And this discount not only counts for the single courses, but also for the already discounted course bundles. So if you've been thinking to get one of these for a while, then there is no better chance than now. So do check them out by clicking the first link in this video's description, and now let's get started with the video. To accomplish this, you need a little bit of initial setup. So on the one hand, I recommend to clone the initial repository, which you can find in this video's description. So that will simply just contain the dependencies we need. It's basically just Gradle config. So we can see we will use Firebase to achieve that. We have some Compose lifecycle dependencies here. We have Compose navigation, since we of course have two screens in our app. We have call Compose to load images remotely, since that will be used for the profile picture. And we use Dagger Hilt to inject dependencies. Or actually, now when I think about it, we don't even need Dagger Hilt. I think I first decided to use it, but then realized we don't really need it, because in the end we just have a single dependency. So let's keep things simple and just not use that. We can click Synchronize Now to apply these changes. And by the way, I'm using Kotlin 1.8.10 in combination with the just released stable version of Compose 1.4.0. So this combination works well for me, so make sure to use the same, but ideally you just clone the project from my video's description. Okay, so before we can actually implement the code that is used for signing in, we should understand how such a Google sign-in works actually. And there are two ways how you can implement that. On the one hand, you have your own authentication server, which just verifies these incoming requests when a user wants to sign in, and that backend server implements like the Google sign-in functionality, has its secure tokens and all that stuff. We don't have that here, and we also don't want to create a backend server and host that, because that's quite a lot of work. What we want to use is Firebase, because Firebase kind of serves as a backend. And with Firebase, it's very easy to integrate such a Google sign into your application. So the first thing we need to do here is we need to connect this fresh Android Studio project with our Firebase console. And to do that, we need to go to Tools and use Android Studio's Firebase Assistant. Click on that. Then a little tab will open up here. And after that has been loaded, we want to scroll up to Authentication, because that's what we want to implement. We want to authenticate using Google with Kotlin. So let's click on that, and we will get a little guide. On the one hand, we'll need to connect this Firebase app here to our Firebase project, which we have on in the browser. And then we need to add the Firebase dependencies, which I already added here. So if you clone the repository, you already have these. Let's click Connect to Firebase. Then this browser window will open up. Depending on which projects you have in your Firebase account, this will of course look a little bit different for you, but I will just create a fresh new project here by clicking Add Project. And then we can give this a name, something like Google Sign In YouTube or so. And then we can click Continue. We don't want to enable these analytics. We just want to keep this as simple as possible, and then click Create Project. This will take a little moment, and then I will see you back once that was successful. There we go, the project was created. We can now click Continue, and then this dialog will show up, hopefully telling us that the project was connected successfully. Takes a little moment again. No, we actually need to click Connect first, so let's do that. And then we will get to some kind of localhost URL, and it tells us that our projects are connected. If we now go back to Android Studio, we should hopefully see some kind of check mark here, or at least a dialog or a pop-up here. Your app is now connected to a Firebase project. And you should also be able to verify that by going to your project view on the top left and checking if there is a Google Services JSON file. You should exclude that from GitHub, so you don't want to push this file to GitHub, because with that, people can get access to your Firebase console if you haven't secured it properly. Next up, we still need to configure this a little bit in our Firebase console. So let's go back to Chrome. I'm not sure if we can go back here. Hopefully, yes, we can. Let's remove all this stuff from the URL we don't want here and just get to the plain console. And then we want to go to this little settings icon, go to project settings, and in here, we can scroll down to our apps that are connected to this project. In here, we get some information about this app, for example, this app ID, which is commonly needed for Firebase config. But what we actually want to do is we want to add such an SHA certificate fingerprint. That is basically a unique fingerprint of our app, so that Firebase really knows that it's our app that is talking to this backend in this case. And to check this fingerprint, because if we click add fingerprint, we of course need to add this kind of weird string. We want to go to Android Studio to generate that. Click on Gradle to open this Gradle assistant here. Go to, I think it's tasks, Android signing report. And if you don't have this section, if it does not show all these tasks for you, you need to open your Android Studio settings. For me, that's Control comma, but might be a bit different for you depending on your shortcuts. And here you want to go to experimental. And you want to make sure that you toggled off this checkbox to only include test tasks in the Gradle task list generated during the Gradle sync. So make sure to toggle this off, synchronize your Gradle once by going to File, Sync Project with Gradle files, and then this task list should also appear for you. We then want to double click on Signing Report, and it will spit out this SHA1 fingerprint, which we want to copy and paste into Firebase, so our console. Let's go back to Chrome. Paste this in here. It will recognize the type of fingerprint, and then we can click Save. Next up, we still need to do something in this console, and that is we need to enable authentication. So we need to tell our Firebase project we want to be able to use Firebase authentication with the apps we connect to this project. And we do this while going to build authentication. And here we need to say get started. And now we need to tell it how we want users to authenticate. So in a real app, you will probably have more than just one Google sign-in option, something like email password, maybe with a phone, maybe Facebook login, Apple login. So there are, of course, lots of ways to authenticate, but Google is a very common one on Android devices. So let's just pick that and make sure to enable this here. So to check this toggle, you can see it tells us we need to add this fingerprint, which we just did. We then need to add a project support email if users have issues. So we should be able to select this here, just your account email. Let's click on that. And then I don't think we need to add anything here. Let's open Web SDK configuration. This is only relevant if you already have some kind of Web SDK. You can see we can reuse a web client ID, but Firebase will generate this ID, which we will need in our project. So we don't need to change anything here and can just click on Save. There we go. Here's our provider. It is enabled, and you also will see if we click on that and scroll down to Web SDK configuration. I won't open this here because it contains a secret, but if you open this, then you will see the values Google generated for you here, which we then need to pass to our app, so our app knows that it is talking to this specific authentication method of this specific Firebase project. Let's switch back to Android Studio, however, and get started coding, because now we have all the Firebase setup we need and we can get into writing some Kotlin code. So I will close these Gradle files here, switch back to the Android view. And now we first of all need to think a bit about the structure we want to choose here, because I intentionally want to stick to clean architecture here on the one hand, because I know many people like that. And on the other hand, because with Google sign-in, it is a little bit tricky to properly integrate that in a clean architecture code base. Because we have one issue with that, and that is that the Firebase SDK for Google sign-in is kind of on the one hand data related, because it of course talks with the backend server, but on the other hand it is UI related at the same time. Since the way this works is we call a function to sign into Google, and the response from the Firebase SDK will be an intent sender. So basically something we can use to send out an intent and launch an activity for a result. Or I think it's technically not launching an activity for a result, but we launch kind of a UI sheet for a result. and the result would be logging in and getting the account. And that is why I will put the class that combines all this login functionality in our presentation package, since it will be directly used in our activity, because we need to launch this intent, which we only do in activities, at least for such UI related intents. But I would say we just get started and see how this will work. So what I will do is I will create a presentation package here, and then inside that a sign-in package. And we will actually only have a presentation layer here, I think, because we don't really have any business logic or data related logic apart from the sign-in thing. But I still think this helps people who want to integrate that in a code base that uses clean architectural guidelines to know where to put things. So in this sign-in package, we want to create a Google auth UI client. That will be the class which, yes, let me add that to Git. That will be the class that we use to sign in, to sign out, and to get the user information about the signed in user. And what this class needs in the constructor is, on the one hand, our context, which is just a context, and it needs a so-called one-tab client, which is a sign-in client. So the one-tab client is the client that comes from the Firebase SDK, which will then in the end show this dialog to sign in. And in here, we also want to have a public reference, actually a private reference, but a global variable, I mean, to our auth object, which we get from firebase.auth. So now we can get to our functions. On the one hand, we want a function, a suspend function, to sign in, because signing in, of course, can take a little moment. And at that time, we want to suspend a coroutine so we can wait for the result. And what this will return is a so-called intent sender. So just an object we can use to send out an intent to achieve something, to fulfill our specific intention, we can say. And to get the result, we can say val result is try catch. We catch exceptions here. And what we want to do is we want to take our one tab client and we say begin sign in. And this will now take a begin sign in request, which I like to build in a separate function. So let's go below here. Say private function build sign in request returns a begin sign in request. And here we can simply return that request. So we want to return begin sign in request dot builder. So we have a typical builder pattern here. And we can then say set Google ID token request options, which is also built via a builder. So you want to say Google ID token request options dot builder. And here we say set supported true. So we just say, hey, this way of authenticating is supported. We want to be able to sign in via these Google token IDs. Then we want to set filter by authorized accounts to false. If we set this to true, then it will already check if you are signed in with a specific account already, or if you have signed in with a specific account already, and then only show that account as an option. But if we set this to false, however, then we will always get the full list of accounts we could potentially log in with. So all of our Google accounts we use with that Android device. And then most importantly, you want to set the server client ID to something, which I think Firebase, like the SDK, will already include in your string resources if you use their Gradle plugin, which I think I haven't included here. But we can also very easily get that ID from our Firebase console by clicking on our sign-in method Google, scrolling down, opening this web SDK configuration, and copying this web client ID. Let's then go back to Android Studio, go to strings XML, copy the string, call this default web client ID, or just web client ID, for example, and then we paste in this ID. We can then go back to our Google Auth UI client, and in here I want to say context, get string, that string dot web client ID. And then we can say that build. And then for our outer begin sign in request builder, we want to also add one more option, and that is the set auto select enabled. We want to set that to true. What that will do is if you only have a single Google account you can sign in with, it will automatically select that one, because otherwise you would need to have that additional tab on the account, which is pretty obvious here. If you want to sign in, you only have one account, you can also directly sign in with that. Then we want to say .build, and we have our sign in request, which we can now pass to our one-tab client. So build sign in request, and by default, all these Firebase functions will return a task. A task is something that executes something asynchronously, and then we can get the result using, for example, add on success listener if that was successful, or on failure listener if it was not successful. However, since we use coroutines here, there's also a wait function which will simply suspend this auto coroutine and wait until the sign-in is finished here. In case there is an exception, this function will throw it. So we can say we print the stack trace, and we also want to check for cancellation exceptions. If this is a cancellation exception, we simply want to rethrow that. The reason for that is a little bit more complex. I talk about that in my video about coroutine cancellation, so feel free to watch that on my channel and search for that. But if we don't do this and catch general exceptions here in a suspend function, this can mess up coroutine cancellation. So after that, we want to pass null here, or rather return null to our result, since if there is an issue, we don't have an intent sender. So down below this, where we have our result, we can then say return result, pending intent, and that pending intent has our desired intent sender. Now, when we take this intent sender and actually send it, then what will happen is that our app will get an intent back with the information about the user's sign-in. And the Firebase auth SDK already contains a function to kind of deserialize that intent that we will receive from this intent sender. And we want to have a function that simply handles this here. So suspend function get sign-in result from intent. In here we pass the intent, and then we want to return a sign-in result, which is a class I will create here. So in our sign-in package, we want to have that sign-in result class, make that a data class. And this will have two fields. On the one hand, our data, which is basically what contains the user data. So the user's name, the profile picture URL, and the user ID in our case. But you can also get more information from your Google account. So this will be a user data object, something we'll also create. Don't import this one. And we want to be able to pass an error message in case something goes wrong, just a nullable string. Let's then implement our user data class down here, which consists of a user ID, which is a string, so a unique identifier for each user, which comes from Firebase. We want to have a username, and we want to have a profile picture URL, which is a nullable string, since not every user might have a profile picture, and the username might also be nullable. I'm not sure here if every Google account has a name. Then going back to Google Auth UI client, it now knows this class, and we can start implementing this function. First of all, we want to get the so-called credential, which we get from this intent. So the resulting intent that gets sent back to our app. For that, we can use our one-step client again, and we say get sign-in credential from intent, and we pass in our intent. We can then get our Google ID token, which is used for authentication from this credential. So that Google ID token, and our Google credentials, so those will now really be the credentials we need to log in with this Google account. That's equal to Google auth provider.get credential. We need to pass in our Google ID token, and for the access token, we can simply pass null here. And then we can return a try and catch block again, catch general exceptions, same thing as in this function above. We want to print the stack trace and catch cancellation exceptions, and in that case want to return a sign-in result where the data is simply null, and this is not nullable at the moment. Let's go in here and make this nullable, and then say the error message is whatever the message is from our exception. In the try block, we want to get the user by saying auth.sign-in with credential. So here we can then pass our auth credential, which in this case is our Google specific credential. So our Google credentials. We can say .await to make this a suspending call. And then we refer to the user, which is now a Firebase user. So that contains information about one user. This could also come from a different source. For example, if you have email password sign in, then you would also get a Firebase user for that. So Firebase really has one shared way of referring to the users you get when you log in. So the stuff until here is Google specific, Google sign in specific, but everything you get after logging in with these Google credentials is just normal Firebase authentication stuff. So we refer to the user, and we can then return a sign-in result again, where the data is a new user data object. The user ID is user.uid, and we can also make sure that we have a null check before So let's remove this first of all, say user $.run, and then we create a user data object. So the UID, user ID is UID, the username is display name, and the profile picture URL is the photo URL. And since that is a URI, we need to convert that to a string. And our error message in this case is null. And maybe we should also rename this function a bit, since this not only gets the sign in result from the intent, but rather signs in with an intent. So let's rename this to sign in with intent. I think that makes it a bit more clear what this function does. Now, what is missing in this class? Not much anymore, just a little function to also sign out again, and a function that retrieves the current user and basically just maps the Firebase user to our own user data object. First of all, a suspend function sign out. And in here again, try catch, that is nothing new. E.print stack trace, if E is cancellation exception, we throw E. Again, referring to my cancellation video. And in here in the try block, we want to say auth, or actually first one tab client dot sign out dot await, and then we say auth dot sign out. And this will just require us that we need to log in again with our account. And then last but not least, we want to have a function here to get signed in user, which will return a nullable user data object, because only if there is a signed in user, we of course can return data. And that is simply auth current user $.run, and we convert that to a user data object where the ID is UID again, username, display name, profile picture URL is photo URL .toString, like this. Cool, and that is really the Firebase Google sign-in logic that you need in your project. The rest of this video will now be building our ViewModel and UI, so to actually be able to click on a button and sign in with that. First of all, let's go to sign in and create a state, a sign in state, which will be super simple. On the one hand, we want to have a state that tells us if the sign in is successful or not, which is false initially. So we'll just use that to observe that and then navigate to the next screen when it is successful. And we want to have a sign in error message, which is simply a nullable string. So we can show errors if there is one. And then we can go to sign in again and create a little view model. This will also be super simple. Sign in view model. And in here we're going to have our state, our private val state is a mutable state flow of sign in state. Like this, we have our public exposed immutable version of the state, since we don't want to expose the mutable version to the UI. And then we simply have a function on sign in result, which we call when we get the sign in result after signing in. Here is the result, and we will then update our state. So state.update, it.copy is sign in successful is if the result.data is not null. So if we actually got a user from that sign in, then we know it was successful. And the sign in error is simply result.error message. And after we change the sign in successful to true, we also want to have a function to reset the state to change it back to false. Because if we then navigate to the next screen, to the profile screen, we want to make sure that if we get back to the login screen, that we're not logged in. So the sign in should be unsuccessful in that case again. So we will simply say state.update with a sign in state, just the default state basically, where the is sign in successful boolean is false again, and there's also no error anymore. And yes, now we can actually implement our sign in screen in the sign in package. Sign in screen, make it a file, just normal composable sign in screen. This will take in our sign in state so we can update the UI properly. And we have an on sign in click lambda, which we call when we click on our sign in button. First of all, let's make sure we have proper error handling. So we can simply show a toast when there is a sign in error. For that, we need the context, which we get with a local context.current. And then we can use a launch effect block, pass in state.sign-in-error. So this launched effect block will now be called whenever this piece of state changes. So whenever that happens, we want to check if there actually is a sign-in error. with the let check here. And if there is, want to show a toast. So toast.makeText, pass in the context, pass in our error message, toast.lengthLong to make it a long toast, and then we call show. And boom, there is our error handling. And for the rest of the screen, that's super simple. We just have a box and a button in the end. So box, where we say, okay, our modifier is a modifier dot fill max size, fill the whole screen size, and we add a little bit of padding of 16 dp. Want to import dp, pressing Alt and Enter, and we want to center our button. So we say content alignment is center. And then in here, we can finally put in our sign in button. When we click that, we say on sign in click, and the text of that button will just be a text composable that says sign in. And yeah, that is already our very simple sign in screen. The next thing is that we need to adjust our main activity. So we now need to set up navigation, that we tell Compose we have 2 screens in the end, and that we also register our intent sender launcher so that we're able to send this intent we get from our auth UI client here. So we first call the sign-in function, and then we get this intent sender. We send this intent sender, or we send the underlying intent. We get an intent back, and that intent that we get back, we will pass to sign in with intent right here, and we will then get a sign in result, which we, however, will pass to our ViewModel, which will then update the state correspondingly here. So that is how this workflow will work. So in our service, let's get a reference to our nav controller by using remember nav controller. We don't need anything in here. And then we can have our nav host. So this nav host will simply host all of our different screens. We need to pass the nav controller. Oops, nav controller. And instead of the graph, we're going to pass a start destination, which is simply our sign in route. Like this. And for this sign in route, we want to have a composable. So with this, we now define this is the composable that should be shown for the sign in screen. So we again refer to our same route, which is our start destination. We get a reference to our ViewModel by saying is equal to ViewModel. Pass in the type of the ViewModel, which is a sign in ViewModel. And we want a reference to our state, which we can get by using by ViewModel state. Collect as state with lifecycle. Alt Enter to import that, and now we get updates to our state as well. Then we want to be able to send this intent we get from the intent sender, or to actually execute this intent sender. And for that, what we need is a so-called activity result launcher. We can get this by saying remember launcher for activity result, and we need to pass in a contract. So basically what we want to do with that launcher. In this case, we want to start an intent sender and get a result back. So we say activity result contracts start intent sender for result. Like this. And on result is then called when we get the result, which is in this case an activity result. We can give this a name, and we can then first of all check if the result code is result okay, which means we got a successful result. And if we did, we want to launch a little coroutine here in lifecycle scope. So we say that launch, and we say we get our sign in result, which is equal to our auth client. We actually don't have that yet. So let's scroll up to our activity here. Oops. And create our client here. So private val, Google auth UI client by lazy. So we initialize that the first time we access it. And it's just equal to Google auth UI client. The context is our application context. And the one-tap client is equal to identity from this Google Android GMS import here. Dot get sign in client, and we pass in our application context again. Then we can scroll down, say val sign in result is equal to Google auth UI client dot sign in with intent. The intent is now equal to result.data. You can see that is simply an intent. And if that is null for whatever reason, for example, if the result was not successful, we can return out of our launch block. After that, we can finally call our ViewModel and say on sign in result and pass this sign in result so our state gets properly updated. And then right now we don't do anything with this launcher. We of course want to execute it when we click on our sign in button, which we want to do below here. So we are still in our screen composable, And what we're missing is, of course, the actual screen composable. So we say sign in screen, pass in our state. And I also don't like this way of writing it, but rather make the onClick lambda a name parameter. So on sign in click. We want to say lifecycle scope that launch. And in here we get the sign in intent. We want to pass to the launcher by saying Google Auth UI client dot sign in. So that is now an intent sender. Let's actually also call it like that. So sign in intent sender. And we can then say launcher.launch. And what this takes as an input is an intent sender request, which we can construct by saying intent sender request.builder. And in here in the builder constructor, we need to pass in our intent sender. So sign in intent sender, and we say .build. If that's null again, we say return at launch, we just ignore this. But if not, we will pass this intent sender request to our launcher. And of course, we're now missing our profile screen, but I would say we already try this out because we should still be able to see the Google sign-in sheet and click on an account and then get a successful response if everything works. So let's actually go right here to test that and have a launch effect block, which is triggered whenever our is sign-in successful Boolean changes. If that is the case, if our sign-in was successful, we simply show a toast for now. And later we then want to navigate. So here we pass application context, we say sign in successful, we say toast length long and call that show. Just like this. And I would say we try this out. Maybe this doesn't work, maybe it does. Let's see. And then after that we can check if there are any issues, how we can fix these. And even better, if there are no issues, then we can resume with the profile screen. Let's let Gradle build and install this here. There we go. Our app is at least building and compiling. If we now click sign in, then our app is crashing. Okay, so it seems like there is an issue. If we scroll up, what is this? Default Firebase app is not initialized. And I feel like this might be related to what I mentioned before, that we don't have the Gradle plugin for Firebase because you usually don't need to call this. But I will take a look at this issue and then get back and let you know how to fix this. Okay, it was exactly what I thought. The plugin wasn't added here, but for you, I will make sure that this is already added in your Gradle config. So if you really clone the project, then it will probably work for you right away. But for me it didn't because I didn't have these Gradle lines here included. So this one and this one. And if we now launch this and take a look here on my phone, we then click sign in, then we see our sign in sheet. So that is looking quite good. I haven't tried to log in with my account yet. So let's try that by clicking on the account, clicking continue as Philip, and we do get sign in successful. So it worked quite well. And as I said, we can now take a look how we can actually get the user data and display that on the next screen on our profile screen. So let's close this Gradle config again and go to our presentation package, create a profile package in which we're going to create a profile screen. Make that a file, composable profile screen. And well, what do we need to display a user? We need a user data object. Like this. And for this screen, we really don't need a ViewModel because it doesn't contain any state and it doesn't contain anything that changes at all. It just displays static user data, but we want to have a lambda when we sign out. Like this. And in the end, we're just going to put in a column in here. The column will have a modifier of modifier fill max size. And we want to center the content vertically and horizontally. Then inside of this column, the first thing we want to see on this page is the user's profile picture. So if user data profile picture URL is not null, we want to show that. I'm actually like this with an async image, which comes from coil. And the model is simply user data profile picture URL. So our URL. The content description will just be profile picture. And let's give the modifier to assign a size of 150 dp. Alt enter to import dp. And we then want to clip it to a circle shape. So we have a circular profile picture. Let's make sure the content scale is crop, although I think Google already crops the images when the users upload them. And we add a little bit of spacing after that with a height of 16 dp. Then the next thing on our profile will be the username. So if the username is existing, we just display a text with that username. So we can say, okay, that text will have a text align of center. We say the font size is something like 36 SP. Alt enter to import SP. And the font weight is simply bold. Well, let's make it semi-bold. And again, we can copy paste this spacer here below, because after this username, we want to display our button to sign out. So button, when we click this, we simply want to call on sign out, and the text will just be sign out. Super simple for this. Then we now need to register the screen in our nav host so that it also knows that. So let's get back to main activity. And below this composable, we want to have an additional screen, so another composable called profile. And this actually has some arguments we need to pass, which is the user data. Theoretically, we could also call our getUser function on the other screen and also pass in our Google Auth UI client. We can actually do this. This is easier than using navigation arguments. This is an experiment here, but it should work. So let's just leave out the navigation arguments and rather go to our profile screen, and instead of passing in the user data, oh no, we can actually leave it like that and pass in the user data. Let's go to main activity. I will show you how. And here we will just have our profile screen. And for the user data, we will now just pass our Google Auth UI client get signed in user. And for on sign out, we will simply have a lambda here, which also calls our Google Auth UI client, calls sign out actually in lifecycle scope like this. And it then simply shows a toast that we signed out. Like this, toast length long, that show. And finally, we want to say nav controller .pop backstack to get to the previous screen. And for our user data, we currently are only allowed to pass non-nullable objects here, but let's make that nullable by going into our profile screen, make it nullable, and simply add these null checks here and here. And that should be it for the profile screen. We now want to have our setup to navigate to our profile screen. So in this launched effect block here, when our sign in is successful, after showing the toast, we also want to navigate. So nav controller .navigate, and we pass in the route we want to navigate to. And also after navigating, we want to make sure that we call ViewModel reset state, because if we then sign out, we want to start with a fresh state since the user needs to log in again. And last but not least, we want to have another launched effect block right up here that will check if the user is already logged in. So if we are already signed in and we relaunch the app, we directly want to get to the profile screen until we sign out. The key can simply be unit, which will execute this launched effect block exactly once when this composable is composed. And in here, we can simply check if Google Auth UI client get signed in user is not null, then we know there is a signed in user. In that case, we can simply navigate to our profile screen. And then we can launch this and try this out. Let's see if our profile screen now works. There we go. We are already logged in because I did that before. We are seeing my information. If I click sign out, then I am signed out. And if we click sign in, then we need to sign in again. Let me sign in with a different account here. Continue as Philip. And boom, there I am with my profile picture. And I can sign out again, or I can relaunch the app to show you again that now this account will be signed in. Sign out. If we now relaunch the app, we are not signed in automatically anymore. So our Google sign in is finally working as expected. You'll of course find all the code for this in this video's description in my GitHub repository, so the initial code and the final code to play around with that. And apart from that, if you really enjoyed this tutorial and you like how I explain things, you like how I structure these things and how I integrate things in an architecture, then you will definitely learn a lot more in my more advanced Android premium courses. So if that sounds good to you and you want to become an industry-ready Android developer, then check the first link in this video's description to get to these courses. And other than that, I just wish you an amazing rest of your week. I will see you back in the next video. Bye bye.